That's number one. You kind of reset.
Painful, tender to the touch. May also
Same shoulder length, and the other. Hello, everybody. This is Amir Rashidian with Brandi Rashidian, and this is Real Health with Brandi and Amir. And Real Health is where we teach you how to feel better, get stronger, live longer, feel younger. And obviously, I think we help them look better too.
I think it's all part of the package.
I agree 100%. And so what we're going to do today, this is the first episode of our podcast. And what we're going to do is just talk about some of the new information in the media and in the news and review some of those articles for you and kind of talk about it and then give you our perspective on things and maybe even talk about what this means to you as the consumer, as the person, as someone who's health conscious, as someone who wants to be healthier, younger, stronger, and all the good stuff. So the first article we found is actually entitled Elon Musk's brain implant company Neuralink announces FDA approval of inhuman clinical study. And you're wondering, what does that mean? Well, Neuralink is one of the companies of Elon Musk. As you may already know, he's the CEO of Tesla, SpaceX, and Twitter. And so I guess he also has a company called Neuralink. And what they've developed is a chip that they want to implant in the brain. And this chip is going to help people who have conditions like ALS where they can't speak. They'll be able to use their mind to move the mouse or the cursor and actually type stuff and communicate.
I know, it's pretty amazing, actually. About a year ago, I actually saw another product that actually just connects. It's almost like a headpiece, and it's supposed to read those messages from the brain and then allow you to use your devices without ever touching it. So it kind of becomes like the Bluetooth, activator to the brain. So when this came out, I'm like, oh my goodness, a year later, like that was the first time I'd seen that. And now we've already moved to implanting into the brain, and we're like, human trials are going, like they've been approved by the FDA. That's crazy.
Absolutely. And apparently there's several biotech companies who have invented this type of chip, but none of them have been approved for inhuman testing yet. This is the first one where the FDA said now you can start experimenting on humans. Sounds a little scary for people who are voluntarily having a chip. So let me read you what it says. It says Neuralink is part of the emerging brain-computer interface, or BCI, industry. A BCI is a system that deciphers brain signals and translates them into commands for external technologies. To read a little further, Neuralink's BCI will require patients to undergo invasive brain surgery. Its system centers around the link. The link is the name of this thing. It's a small circular implant that processes and translates neural signals. The link is connected to a series of thin, flexible threads. I like to call them wires. Inserted directly into the brain tissue where they detect neural signals. So, I mean, to me, it gets a little scarier because it's not just a disc that's going in your brain. It actually has these threads, wires, that go to all the different, because when you think of something image-wise, it's a different part of your brain that lights up versus manual, versus auditory, versus kinesthetic. So there are all these different. You have speech centers, you have language centers, you have picture detection centers. So when you see an apple, you know what it is. They all need to have a wire that goes to them from this thing, so it can receive signals from all of those, and then you can think about a thought, and it'll go. So further, it says patients with Neuralink devices will learn to control it using the Neuralink app. Patients will then be able to control external mice and keyboards through a Bluetooth connection. One more thing. Actually, I'll get to this later. So there's an app, and they'll control. So I wonder if they can also control the person through the app. I wonder if it goes backwards too.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's a question that's been asked yet.
And it doesn't say that, but that's something to be thinking about, because if they can throw stuff into the brain. So here's where it gets a little controversial. The Physicians Committee responsible for medicine, which advocates against animal testing, has repeatedly called on Elon Musk, to release details about experiments on monkeys that had resulted in internal bleeding, paralysis, chronic infections, seizures, declining psychological health, and death. So when they were testing these on the monkeys, these poor monkeys had a ton of terrible reaction, including some got paralyzed, some had internal bleeding that they couldn't stop, seizures,
or at least that's what they're saying, and they want to see these tests.
Right.
I agree. Before something so invasive like this actually takes place, I mean, I can't imagine even signing up for, a study like this without that information. Do we not require that? Do we not require those to be released to the public when we're moving into human trials? Because if not, I think we should.
Well, I'm pretty sure we do, because if you're an FDA, Food and Drug Administration agent, and you have to approve this for human testing, you're going to see everything they've done.
They will, but I'm talking about the rest of us. I would like to know.
I understand.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that should be released generally as well, although I would like to see most of the results
when they
of these
deliver
tests.
they're like, okay, you're about to put this in your brain, and it's a box with, I'm imagining something being delivered. Anyways, we're going to put this in your brain. By the way, 17 monkeys became paralyzed when they put this in their brain, and 22 monkeys had internal brain bleed.
And one is now sucking his thumb again, and he's 82. So, I would want to know those things. I think that's super important. Now, the flip side of that is, if you think about for cases like somebody who has ALS, we understand that that's a very progressive disease, correct?
Yep.
And they haven't yet found a way to stop the progression of ALS.
Right.
So for a disease process, and please know, I tend to be very conservative when it comes to things like this.
Risk benefit.
Correct.
There's a risk this person will die in this invasive surgery that they're talking about.
Right.
However, if he lives and the chip works, now he can communicate with his family.
Yeah. So the quality of life, and that's what we're talking about right now, is this is a quality of life product for individuals who have a diagnosis that is terminal.
Right.
Right. And the time of that, that they're living out the rest of their days is not quality. Right. So in that regard, I have less problems with the human trials or with a product like this coming out.
I want to address that, but first I want to go back to the FDA, because what I know about the FDA is they require 3 positive trials. So literally you could run 1,000 trials.
Correct.
And 997 of them can be terrible with negative results. You don't have to show the FDA those results. You just show the 3 that showed positive results. The FDA only looks at those 3 and approves it, which makes it even a little scarier. That's why my personal belief, and I don't advocate this and I don't prescribe it as a doctor or a person, I know legally there's a lot that goes into this. My own personal belief is, if a drug has been out on the market less than 5 years, I don't take it.
Yeah.
Because even if the FDA approved it, there's possibility there were all these negative trials and the FDA approved it based on the 3 positive trials. And so I just want to see what it does in 5 years of being tested on the actual population before I would take it.
Well, because we know there's things that have been on the market for longer than 5 years. And then they're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm so sorry. This is going to affect 3 generations of your offspring.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So we know that things that are out on the market and are fairly new, we probably should be wary.
Now, going back to what you were saying about how if someone is on their deathbed anyways, it's worth the risk to put this chip in so they can communicate with their family and maybe even be able to get out of a wheelchair and walk, or at least control the wheelchair with their mind. If their hands aren't moving, if they're paralyzed from the neck down, their mind can control their wheelchair, which is pretty cool. Someone doesn't have to push them and move them around. All of that's great. But here's what the article says. In addition to helping patients with paralysis, experts believe BCIs could someday help treat maladies like blindness and mental illness. Here's where it gets interesting. Musk has expressed his intent for Neuralink to explore these future use cases as well as potential applications for healthy people. He, in fact, plans to someday receive one of these Neuralink implants for himself in his own brain. So what he wants to do is eventually put this in healthy people. So what does that mean for healthy people? What do you think it's going to do to healthy people? So if you're healthy, let's say someone comes up to you and says, I can put a chip in your brain. I'm going to implant wires that go from that chip to all the different brain centers. And then you can do Google searches in your brain. You don't even have to type things. You just go, I wonder what's the meaning of some big fancy word. And instantly you have the answer because that chip just did your Google search for you. And you go, today I want to be an Australian. And instantly you download an Australian accent and now you sound totally different. Or you download French because you're about to go to Paris for a week and you'll be fluent in French.
I read a lot of sci-fi, so you're right along this the right page here. I mean, the possibilities would not be very limited if you think about it. It's also really scary to think that there would be a line of people, a great number of people who would sign up for that without questioning it.
Yeah.
A lot.
Oh yeah. Well, at least, one thing is I'm glad he believes in it enough that he's willing to implant it in his own brain.
But he's got such a good brain. Do we really want to risk it?
You know what I'd like to do is I'm going to ask that we all say a prayer for all the people who are going to get tested on with this, because it hasn't been FDA approved for everybody, just trials. And so I'm hoping nothing bad happens. Now we have, I was thinking our next article should also stay about the brain, because
I love this article.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. It's about this girl who at a young age, I think she was 6 months, half her brain was removed because she had a stroke while she was still in the womb.
In utero, yep.
So the title article, now that article before was from
CNBC.
Business News at CNBC. This one is NPR. And is that National Public Radio? NPR. And so the title is Meet the Glass Half Full Girl Whose Brain Rewired After Losing a Hemisphere. Hemisphere means half the brain. And
now this one I found so fascinating because now we have 3 boys, right? And we've always talked about the difference between...
You wonder if they have half a brain?
Well, sometimes we do wonder that. But when they were young and they were learning to walk and talk, we had read a study that said walking and talking in development are both gross motor skills, and boys cannot do that at the same time. So they can't develop those things at the same time because they have fewer synapses between the right and left hemisphere of the brain, making it much harder. Now there's anomalies, right? But typically if one would talk early, they would probably be a later walker. And if one was a late walker, they'd be probably an early talker. And so that fell true in all 3 of our kids. So when I, read this article, I was like, this is so cool that, I mean, this is beyond what Elon Musk can do. You know what I mean? So this just goes to show you how unbelievable our bodies and our brains were created, because your brain can rewire itself. Like, it can rewire itself. So sorry, this is a neat article.
Don't ever underestimate that 3-pound thing we have in our skull.
Miraculous.
What it is capable of. And in the chiropractic profession, we call it innate wisdom. It's an inborn wisdom, pre-programmed, we believe, by God, for the body to self-regulate, and it knows what it needs, how much of it needs. That's why we have opioid receptors in our body, not because they knew God knew someday people would invent opioids and
Right.
drugs, but because you can release your own opioids. When you exercise, for example, there's endorphins, which is
Yep.
morphine that gets released in your body, or dopamine receptors and serotonin receptors. All these receptors, the reason drugs work is because we're already created with those receptors, but we also have the ability to produce those chemicals, hormones, enzymes, coenzymes in our bodies, which is miraculous.
And just take a minute to think about that, because most people don't know that.
Right.
Most people don't know, like if you've ever had a baby and you've done natural delivery, you know what we're talking about, right? Because that's an unbelievable amount of pain and discomfort. We all know what happens. So for women to be able to do that, I know not all choose to, but a lot of women choose to do that without pain meds. A lot of people choose to do that at home. So how is it that they're able to do that? It's because the body is equipped already. So we forget that.
And what's great is right afterwards you release oxytocin so you don't hate your baby.
100%.
This thing just caused all this pain. I love it.
And all the pain I know it's going to cause. Yes, that's very true.
So the article says the 15-year-old has grown up without the left side of her brain after it was removed when she was very young. In most, in most people, speech and language live in the brain's left hemisphere. That's the one that they removed. When she was 9 months old, surgeons removed the left side of the brain. Yet at 15, Maura plays soccer, tells jokes, gets her nails done, and in many ways lives the life of a typical teenager. Her slow cadence-free speech is one sign of a brain that has had to reorganize its language circuits. So she's not like 100%. Her speech sounds a little different, but it's remarkable. In fact, it says, yet to a remarkable degree, Maura's right hemisphere has taken on jobs usually done on the left side. It's an extreme version of brain plasticity, the process that allows a brain to modify its connections to adapt to new circumstances.
Correct.
I wonder, that's the thing, is that's how we learn, right? As babies, we're constantly learning things. That's the brain rewiring itself.
And that's what happened. So when they removed that side of the brain, the things she could do, she could no longer do. So like she was rolling over, she couldn't roll over anymore. So there was like a definitive like reduction in motor skills, reduction in abilities just by removing the hemisphere that was not functioning as high or at all. And then she stopped doing those things. And then with very aggressive treatment and aggressive PT and OT, she was able to regain that. It didn't happen without work. So let's just remind everybody, anything worthwhile takes work, right? It doesn't happen. But there wasn't massive things that the doctors did to make that happen. That was all her body's own ability and rewiring. That's amazing.
You know, I wish we knew why she had a stroke. It says sometime in the third trimester of her mom's pregnancy, the child she was carrying had a massive stroke on the left side of the brain, and no one knew it. Actually, they didn't know it for a few years afterwards, and then she started having seizures. And when she started having seizures, they did a brain MRI. They found out that major parts of the left side of the brain were dead, and the cells that were still alive were causing those seizures. Now, I know the most extreme treatment of epileptic seizures is the same thing. But apparently she was having several seizures per minute. There were 20 of them in a minute, and then there were hundreds of them a day.
Nightmare for any parent.
So, anyways, that's why they removed. But I know some people have a lot of seizures, epileptic seizures. They separate the right and left hemispheres of the brain, and that stops the seizures. Now, in the old days, way old, thousands of years ago, they used to take a hand drill, and they'd drill a hole in the center of the skull all the way through the brain. The theory was that there's a demon in this body, and the demon needs to come out through the center of the brain. What's interesting is it did the same thing these surgeons do. It separated, because the drill would go all the way through, and it would separate the right and left side of the brain. And if that person didn't, can you imagine a rusty metal drill going in? So if they didn't get infected and they didn't die, which some of them apparently didn't die, their seizures stopped. And they just said, well, it must have been a demon, and we put a hole so the demon could come out. Now, what's interesting is the demon didn't need a hole to get in.
Well, there are a few holes it could have gotten in, I'm sure.
But it needed the hole to come out. I wonder if they put suction on it and pulled the demon out that way. Anyways, yeah, like you said, this is pretty incredible.
I'm glad we've learned a few things in medicine since then. For the record, I did have a hand drill that was used on my leg when I had a broken leg. So I do actually have an idea of what that would feel like in the bone.
Yeah.
And you can feel it like
Feel the
going
screw
through.
coming
You can
out,
feel
yeah.
the screw coming out. It was very interesting.
Right. Well, like you said, she right after surgery, she could no longer roll over. She couldn't smile. She lost the ability to do a lot of those things, and then it came back, like you said. Now the question becomes this, and this is what I'm wondering, is does that brain plasticity end when we get older? Because people who've had strokes that are older seem to not recover. My personal theory is that children will keep working at it, and adults try a few times and quit.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, but is there something physiologically to, is it that like you said, that we stop doing as much or stop trying or stop doing the things that create the workout for our brain as we get older? Why is it that it's the elderly then that are more susceptible to dementia and Alzheimer's and things like that? We don't see that in
So
kids.
I have a patient who had a stroke, and she was under care prior to that as well, and then she had 3, I believe, strokes. You probably know who I'm talking about.
I do.
And one of her hands doesn't work as well as the other one, but she has full speech and everything else. She says she's a little slower processing things. That's by her admission. I haven't seen a big change, but one of her hands doesn't work as well. And 3 months after the stroke, she goes, I guess I'm never going to get that hand back.
Right.
Now it's been, I don't know, a year, and the hand is still not the same. But let me tell you this. This young lady, this girl, wasn't able to sit up again until 18 months old. They did the surgery at 9 months. It took her 9 months to just be able to sit up again. It wasn't until she was 23 months old where she finally walked. So this is so like it's constant, persistent work and not giving up. Like our patient has says, I am resigned to the fact that this hand is never going to be the same as the other hand. And so I'm just going to use my other hand more. And she was refusing to do that. It's like when we ask a question, how long should it take for a kid to learn to walk? The answer is as long as it takes.
Right.
Because nobody quits. But when we're older, we quit. We're like, hey, I tried, learning how to rock climb, and I quit. Right. It just wasn't for me. I couldn't do it. But, when you learn to walk,
it's not for you.
How many times do you fall?
All the time.
How would you feel if you fell 20 times a day on your rear every single day for 3 months straight?
Yeah. At probably, at 40 or 50, you'd be like,
that's enough.
Forget it. Just put me in a chair and call it a day.
I'm just going to sit on the floor the rest of my life. So I don't know if that's the difference between adults. There was in the same article I talk about a study where they looked at people who had half the brain removed. The researchers knew that when adults experience an injury to one side of the brain, it often results in permanent impairment. A stroke on the right side tends to impair facial recognition, while a stroke on the left side tends to affect a person's speech and language. Irrespective of whether the left or right hemisphere is preserved, these kids can recognize both faces and words. So when it's happening in children who have half the brain removed, they seem to rewire things and get better, and grown-ups seem to have permanent. And now they weren't perfect. The children were 80% accurate.
Which is still very impressive.
80% is pretty good.
Well, for having
half a brain.
Half a brain.
That's not a negative thing. She always says she wonders if I even have half a brain.
That's a totally different thing.
That's a different, yeah. You also thought I was irregular. We'll leave it at that. We can't use the certain words on a podcast. The results suggest that the remaining hemisphere rewires to preserve both functions rather than favoring the function usually found on that side. It also shows that half a brain can't fully replicate the capabilities of a full one. So try to hold on to your whole brain. Yeah.
But that's pretty amazing.
It is. She's a little weak on the right side of her body. But the fact that she can do all those things like dance and
Yeah.
go to school and learn and everything is pretty amazing. So
And also, let's not discount her attitude towards life or towards her abilities, right?
Yeah.
I don't really like to say disabilities because if we
Right.
focus, we all have disabilities. If we focus on those, we'll have more of those, right? But she has a lot of abilities despite having, half of a brain.
yeah.
And so, but her attitude that goes along with that, and I just want to point that out because if most of us in whatever circumstance we're in, especially when it has to do with our health, if we took a different approach, if we were able to look at it with a glass half full, despite the circumstance that we're going through, I think our results and our success and our progress would be much different, much better.
Yeah.
So I think we
agree.
have, not only should we be learning about the amazing abilities of the brain, that it's far more capable than what we give it credit for,
Yeah.
but also that mind body connection
Right.
is 100% so
You know
important.
what I wish they would do, and I don't know how you would organize or structure such a study, but what would be really neat is to have a group of people who've had half their brain removed and don't tell them that half their brain has been removed. Just be like, hey, we did it. We did an operation, and you're fine now. Just tell them they're fine. You have all your faculties. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
And then the other half knows that they're missing half a brain. And I wonder if the group that thinks they have their whole brain would recover even faster. See, from a personal standpoint, so I grew up, and it's a long story, but I grew up with severe dyslexia. And so it's very hard for me to, you can see I can read now, but it was extremely hard. In fact, even now, you'll notice sometimes I'll make a lot of mistakes. It takes me a while. I usually read in my head first, and then I pronounce it. So when I'm reading, it's a little slower. But it's because I have severe dyslexia. I have dyslexia. I didn't know I had dyslexia till I was 40 years old when I was writing my first book. And I realized, oh, man, there's something wrong with me. And I did some research and did some testing. And I go, wow, I have dyslexia. Thank God I didn't know I had dyslexia. Because can you imagine? First grade, I remember this so clearly. Teacher would call on me to read out loud in class. And I grew up in Iran. And I would start reading, and I could hear the whole class laughing. They would just laugh and laugh and laugh because my eyes would jump, and I would see the third word, then the second word, then the fifth word, and I'd try to string it into a sentence, and I just sounded. And then I would go home to do my homework, and the homework's supposed to take 30 minutes. It literally would take me 2.5 hours. And my mother would literally yell at me going, why aren't you getting your homework done? This isn't that hard. I go, I don't know. I just keep getting distracted. I had no idea. I think there's some sort of ADD in me as well.
I can confirm that.
So it's dyslexia, ADD, but I didn't know. Because I didn't know, I assumed, okay, I must be slower than the average person, and I'm probably not as smart as the average person. What that means is I got to work harder. And I did. I worked a lot harder. I remember throughout school, I went to college, graduated near the top of my class. Yeah. I went to grad school, chiropractic school, graduated near the top of my class there. I passed all my boards first time around. Now, boards are timed standardized tests. I didn't finish them because I couldn't read fast enough. So I had to get every question right because I knew I was only going to get through probably 2/3 of the test, and you needed 2/3 right answers to pass your boards. So I would get everything right, but I couldn't finish. I figured it out. And see, I think that's what she did. She figured it out.
Yeah, I think so. We over time too, just as a side note, have a lot of people have negative connotations when it comes to things like dyslexia and ADD and ADHD. But one way we like to describe ADD and ADHD is that it's a Ferrari brain with bicycle brakes, right? So typically people, who have those.
And let me say, you are quoting Ned Hallowell, who is
Yes.
a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School.
Yeah.
Said ADD brains are Ferrari brains with bicycle brakes.
And we have found in practice that to be 100% true, right? And in what we see too, working with other entrepreneurs and CEOs and whatnot, and coaching them, is that they too are Ferrari brains with bicycle brakes, right? These are people, I think if we had those bicycle brakes, we may not accomplish what
You
we
run off
have
the road.
accomplished.
You
Yeah.
run the road turns and you keep going straight.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom line.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we have 4 more articles that we were going to get through, but we didn't get through those. But I think the conversation was valuable. I hope it benefited you. Listen, what you need to take away from this is that be careful what gets implanted into your brain. That's number one.
Huge.
Let's hope these trials go well, and let's hope positive things come out of it. And secondly, do not discount what your brain is capable of. If you are older, you can still learn amazing things.
Just
You
don't give
can-
up.
Yeah, you can recover from a stroke. You can do the things you want to be able to do. Don't discount it. Believe in it and keep practicing like a child does. Children practice way better. They don't quit as early.
Yeah.
And don't let your kids quit, because those children, if we allow them to quit, then they stop growing. We have to let them keep trying.
I love that.
So tune in again next time for the next pod. This was episode 1. We're going to go through hopefully these next 4 articles on the next episode, and then we'll have more news for you, and we'll go from there. Please like our channel and the episode. Subscribe to the channel.
Invite your
comment.
friends and family to
Please.
join.
Yeah, because no one else is going to go over the latest news with a wellness, health-oriented perspective and viewpoint. So hopefully that's benefiting you. We'll talk to you again soon. Take care. God bless.